Morning, everyone. My name is Michael Fenn. I wanted to let you know that my colleague Ken Sealing, who's driving down from Waterloo region, has been found himself in behind a traffic accident on the 403, and he's going to be a few minutes late. So I think we probably can push things off for about 10 minutes, and then we will start. If he's here, then that's great. If he's not, then we'll press on. So if you want to get a cup of coffee or something, don't bring it back in here. That's fine, but we'll get started about 22, something like that. If you could take your seats, we're going to begin the presentations. Morning, everyone. My name is Michael Fenn, and I'm joined by my colleague Ken Sealing. We apologize for the late start, but we will press on. We have a number of delegations before us, and we are eager to get to them. I appreciate your patience. Ken Sealing and I have been appointed as special advisors to Steve Clark, the Minister of Municipal Affairs, and we are being asked to provide recommendations as part of the government's Regional Government Review. The purpose of the Regional Government Review is to examine governance, decision-making, and service delivery functions for 8 regional municipalities and Simcoe County, and to identify opportunities to ensure that these municipalities are working effectively and efficiently and can continue to provide the vital services on which our communities depend. It affects 82 municipalities in total in our review, and we're particularly interested in good ideas, things that would improve service delivery for residents and businesses, things that would reduce costs to taxpayers, and looking forward, changes in organization and service delivery to service over the next couple decades. Our role as special advisors is to provide the government with recommendations on how to achieve these objectives. We should make the point that once we deliver our recommendations, the government will decide whether they're going to be released publicly or whether they're going to take action on them or what other actions they might take. It's to be treated as advice to Cabinet. These meetings today are an opportunity for individuals and organizations within Niagara that live, work, and spend time in the municipalities, included both here and in other areas of the review, and to provide us with direct feedback. The input we received today and through the broader consultation process that includes an online survey and opportunities to provide written submissions will inform our deliberations and our recommendations to the government. We have organized the day so that individuals are going to be provided with 5 minutes to make their presentations and organizations with 10. We'll let you know when you've reached the end of your allotted time, and the board in front of you shows the timing, and regional staff have agreed to help us with keeping that timer working. We may have questions about your presentation, but I should note that any questions that we ask are in the vein of understanding your ideas and recommendations. You shouldn't glean from what we say what direction we're going or that we're backing a particular idea. It's too early for that. We haven't formed our opinions, and we haven't been given any specific instructions from the government about outcomes or anything of that kind. So we're really interested in what your proposals mean and how they would play out in practice. So if you say something is orange and we ask why it's blue, or if you say it's blue, we might ask why it's not orange. So that's the approach that we're going to take. If you wish to provide us with a copy of your presentation or other material that you would like us to consider, please provide it to the ministry staff that are here on my right. A number of you have already made written submissions and provided them to us here. If you have additional information and would like to provide that, and you don't have it with you today, you can submit it any time before the 21st of May. I saw something in the paper saying the 25th. It's the 21st of May for the submissions. And you can do that in the form of a written submission on our online portal, which you can find at ontario.ca, regional government, fairly straightforward. And there's also a questionnaire that highlights some of the issues, and we would be pleased to have you complete that. As part of these presentations, we won't be taking questions from the audience, and we'd ask the audience to be respectful of those making presentations in terms of not to interrupt them or otherwise. So I think that covers most of what I have. We'll take a short break, about a half hour for lunch, and unless my colleague has any questions or observations, we would start with our presentations. I should say in passing that we do appreciate the support that we've been given by the Regional Municipality of Niagara staff. We imposed on them to use the Regional Council facility, Regional Council chambers and the facilities, and we appreciate the support of the municipal folks in the Niagara region to make this day more productive for us. So with that, our first presentation on behalf of, as I understand it, not just the Niagara Falls Public Library, but the Niagara Libraries, the 12 of them within the region, is going to be made by Alicia Subnik Kilgore, and perhaps someone else, and if there is someone else, perhaps you can identify yourself and introduce yourselves to the audience. Thanks.
Hello, thank you so very much for this opportunity this morning, and I just want to introduce my library board chair, Anne Andreas Jones.
You can't hear behind?
Oh, well.
Okay. Somebody can turn the sound up.
Push.
Is the button on?
We good?
Technician's coming down.
Oh. Good morning.
Yes.
We're good? Okay.
That doesn't come to your time. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. We'd like to thank you for this opportunity to present on behalf of all of Niagara's volunteer public library boards. We have here today Dave Hunter, the Vice Chair of Niagara-on-the-Lake Public Library, Les McDonald, the Chair, and Susan Tromenhauser, Vice Chair of the St. Catharines Public Library Board, and myself, as Alicia introduced me, Anne Andres Jones, the Chair of Niagara Falls Public Library Board. I'd also like to acknowledge and thank the members of the cooperating library boards and staff who are present and supporting us from the Spectators Gallery. And at this time, I'd like to call upon Dave Hunter to make the cooperative presentation from all of our 12 community library boards.
Thanks, Anne. Mr. Fenn, Mr. Sealing, and members of council, thank you for allowing the four of us to provide some comments about decision-making and service delivery in our Niagara communities. You know, with respect to your many years of service, we hope you'll bear with us. We think we should start with some basics to provide a foundation for our remarks. The Public Libraries Act requires that locally appointed independent boards manage our public libraries. And we do this as volunteer members, unpaid, unlike municipal councils and other boards. In each of our diverse and unique communities in this region, it's our library boards, composed of people who live in the communities, who are tasked with ensuring that our library services are accessible, they're close to home, and they're delivered in a way that meets the needs of those specific communities. So the result of that is we end up with knowledgeable people who can point their available resources at the different needs in different communities. And we thought some examples would help. If you take Niagara Falls and you go to the main library, it's very evident that Niagara Falls has a marginalized community that's a significant part of Niagara Falls. And that includes homeless people. Now, its library is a registered charity, and because of that, they're able to provide social services that probably would not otherwise be available. In St. Catharines, the library staff have found themselves working with local service providers trying to deal with the opioid crisis. If you turn to our rural communities, I could use West Lincoln as an example. What you find out there is internet services unreliable, it's low quality, or it's not there at all. So if you're a rural student and you need to get online to take a course, where do you go? You go to your library. And in fact, almost 90% of the libraries in Ontario have a working relationship with the school, and that has an impact. In fact, it's been found that that increases scores on standard tests. So we could propose a useful question. What would happen if this informed local direction was no longer available? Now, we're not looking at the world through rose-colored glasses. Our local board members are community leaders, they're small business people, they're professionals. We understand that our limited resources must be deployed in a way that's fiscally responsible and in a manner that's transparent. And that understanding has ensured that we've been working with our library staff to optimize the use of scarce resources in a variety of ways. And you invited us to talk about ideas that can be of assistance. So I can report that in the region, we've been coordinating staff and board training. We've been providing reciprocal borrowing. Advertising costs have been shared. And until a few days ago, we were part of a province-wide system for interlibrary borrowing. Here in the Niagara region, the library staffs have created LINK, which is a similar system that happens among an expanding number of Niagara region libraries. And even the boards have been working cooperatively. I discovered that when almost 40 of us were pulled together just like that to provide a response to your invitation for public consultation. So we like the opportunity that you're providing to work together with the Ontario government to address outdated red tape, to discover efficiencies in the way that will help our local public library boards continue to deliver essential resources and services to meet the ever-changing needs of our communities. But if we could, we'd like to urge you, when you're preparing your recommendations for the Ontario government, to maintain the current structure of decision-making that allows our community-led public library boards to continue to focus their resources where they are most needed. Thank you for your time, the opportunity to talk to you. The four of us wonder if you have any questions that you would like to pose at this time.
Well, I have several, and some of this might be more properly directed to board members and some to staff. You can decide who comes to the plate. The three things I was wondering about is I have worked in a county library system, and I've seen how that works in rural communities and urban communities, and I'm wondering in terms of the structure you have, whether there'd been any consideration to alternatives that would see the governance structure brought together in a more integrated fashion. And I guess what I'm thinking of in particular is my observation of libraries over the last decade is when you go into a library, it's not like it once was, and it's materially different. And that probably means that it's going to change quite a bit going forward. And I'm interested to know how you link governance and the future agenda or the future service delivery role of libraries in communities.
Well, thank you for your question. Firstly, our structure is also determined by the current council structure in place. So I gather that if there are changes to that, there would be somewhat of a domino effect. Currently, all of our public library boards are appointed by municipal councils. So I am familiar with the county systems, and I would also like to say that our regional libraries are open to working with the government to determine a structure that will work for all 12 municipalities. Currently, even though we are 12 separate municipalities, we do work together as a region. We've had many regional initiatives, including starting to move towards the same integrated library system. We're sharing IT. We're looking at ways to leverage our collection development and resources for our community, and really looking at deploying our scarce resources in a manner that truly is impactful and meets our community needs. So at this point in time, I feel that we would be open to different systems. We just want to ensure that our volunteer community-led boards that can truly speak to the local needs of each community have an opportunity to make those decisions for those communities that each have unique and different needs.
Mr. Sealing may have a question. I had one sort of test I often employ when people talk about the service delivery. If I'm a high school student in Niagara, can I get a book out of any Niagara library?
May I? Yes, go ahead, sir. Right now, the libraries have reciprocal borrowing in place. It is our hope that by the end of the year, we have reciprocal borrowing through the whole region, and that is how each of our libraries have been moving forward. Last year, we started with 2. This year, I think now we have 5, and we have plans to bring on the rest of the library board. So we are looking at open reciprocal borrowing in our region through LINK, which we are now reevaluating in light of some of the government budget cuts. But that is the idea, that if you live in this region, whether you work in one community or another, that you have access to all the resources our 12 municipalities have for you.
So given the provincial cutbacks, and you got 12 systems on the go, do you not see efficiencies in having common backhouse, common management? I mean, if you have scarce resources,
Yeah.
if you have scarce resources, where are the resources best placed? In maintaining 12 separate governance structures, 12 separate backhouse operations, 12 separate management roles?
Let me start with a simple answer, no. Okay? It's the geographic separation. Sorry, that's the geographic separation and the different needs from community to community. That's the one thing we're trying to get across. So if you have a common governance structure, that structure would be composed of a small cluster of people who would find it particularly challenging to be in constant communication, to be able to constantly assess what we're discovering are quite rapidly changing needs in communities. So it's that distance that's created by that kind of organizational structure that would blunt our ability to point our resources in the direction that we need to point them. We know, as you can tell, we've been using those resources more efficiently, and we want to use them in the future even more efficiently in the kind of creative ways we've exemplified. That's one process. The government process is the process that points those resources. So you can be creative without a centralized structure, but that centralized structure we would propose would generate a risk for the individual communities.
And I just also want to add that in the case of the recent budget cuts, provincial budget cuts to SOLS and OLS North, like in the spirit of cooperation, our 12 municipalities, our libraries do work together, and we actually have leveraged our time to come together tomorrow morning to discuss how we can continue to provide interlibrary loan borrowing, or reciprocal borrowing through our region despite the cuts that have come.
I asked the question because during my 7 years as mayor, I was chair of the regional library board, and we ran programs in all the communities that we ran programs for, and so there is some efficiency there, I believe. But anyway, thank you. I appreciate your views on that.
Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Ken Oudzis. Ken, are you here? And can you introduce yourself to the audience, please? You have 5 minutes to make your presentation.
Thank you for the opportunity today. One of the things we've heard a lot about through this process of regional government review, everybody seems to be jumping to the idea that we're already predetermined to have amalgamations. And I think that it's important to note that there's been a history in Ontario of amalgamations, as there's been in Quebec. And the last time we undertook amalgamations, most recently in 2001, there was this idea that bigger was better and that fewer politicians would actually be cheaper. But we've seen, in the case of the City of Hamilton, the City of Toronto, that sometimes amalgamations have unintended consequences. So I'm here to talk a little bit about options other than amalgamation, because that's what this review is all about. It's not about a presupposed outcome of amalgamation. It's about how can we become more efficient and more effective.
Ken, can I just stop you there? Would you introduce yourself in terms of who you are?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was trying to maximize my 5 minutes. My name is Ken Oudzis. I live in the City of Hamilton. I have a lot of interaction in Niagara region as well as in Halton region, and have been politically involved for quite some time. I'm here today just again because I think that there are some alternatives to amalgamation that we can consider as part of this review. First of all, I think standardizing the composition of regional councils would be helpful. For example, why does Oakville or Grimsby elect a regional council and a town councillor to represent the exact same geographic area? A lot of people don't understand that and they don't know the difference, whereas cities like Burlington elect one councillor to represent one ward, and they do that on both the regional and town or city level. The next option, and we heard a little bit about this from the presenters from the library, there's something that the federal government of Canada rolled out in 2011 called Shared Services Canada. And Shared Services Canada is all about, in that case, going across the federal government and looking at services, whether they be IT or what have you, and managing them that way. So the question is, do we actually need regional government to manage these shared services, such as wastewater, transit, transportation planning, and those sorts of things? So maybe there's another way, without saying we're scrapping regional government, that we could maintain local communities, maintain those local decision-making, while at the same time taking a shared services approach where we're focused on service delivery and how can we drive efficiency. Next, I think that we can improve efficiency and cut red tape by eliminating duplication? Does it really make sense for a regional municipality to have to approve the official plan of a lower tier municipality? It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of bureaucracy, and it delays a lot of important infrastructure and in some cases development. Next is clarity and transparency. I challenge anyone to go to the region's website, their local municipality's website, and try to make sense across this province in regional government jurisdictions who actually does what. When stormwater and wastewater, as an example, sometimes stormwater is managed by the municipality and wastewater is managed by the region, and sometimes it's the reverse. It's very, very difficult for the average Joe taxpayer to understand the difference. Next, if we're talking about amalgamations and we're talking about boundaries, what we really need to talk about is we're looking at 46 to 49-year-old regional boundaries that were established when populations were much smaller. Does it actually make sense to make these decisions based on the boundaries? And so in the package I provided to you, I gave a map showing sort of Niagara region, Halton region, and the city of Hamilton. And there's some places that just don't make sense on this map. And so I know that Hamilton is not being considered, but in Halton region, it would make sense to use Highway 6 as the natural dividing line between two regions, because that's how the communities have grown. Over here in Winona-Grimsby, on the Niagara boundary side, we have this bizarre situation where above the Niagara escarpment, it suddenly juts out. Well, if you draw the line from the top of the escarpment straight down to the lake, you're creating more natural efficiencies. What do I mean by natural efficiencies? Well, a lot of the communities, the people are already in Burlington and Waterdown working together. In Winona and Grimsby, regional transit hubs, retail, all of this stuff is growing. So there's logical divides that, quite frankly, the current regional government system and single-tier municipality boundaries just don't make sense. And finally, if we go down the road and the decision is that bigger is better and that amalgamation is where this thing is going, we have to learn the mistakes from the mistakes of the past. Specifically, we need to determine any amalgamated boundary based on the commonalities of community, not the existing municipal or regional boundaries. So there's 12 municipalities here in Niagara. Would it make sense to combine 12 into one? My goodness, how would you even manage that? And we heard a little bit from the library board about the differences and the disparities in some of the libraries. So it's about, if we go down the road of amalgamation, looking at the municipalities that can logically be grouped together, that have things in common, that could grow together and that the people are already related. Second, we saw in the city of Hamilton, when amalgamation was put forward, the government did not set the first operating budget for the new city of Hamilton. The result of that is that the highest municipal cost became the standard. Every efficiency, every cost went through the roof, and as a result, you're seeing Hamilton continually 18 years later as one of the highest tax municipalities in Ontario. And lastly, consulting the people who live in the region. If amalgamation is what we're talking about, the government should look at, and the recommendation perhaps of this panel should be to consult with the people who live in the region. In Hamilton, they did referendums. In Kawartha Lakes, they did referendums. In Hamilton, between 88 and 93% of the people did not want to be amalgamated into the new city of Hamilton. Fast forward 18 years later, the divides are there. Every time there's an issue, LRT, downtown Hamilton redevelopment, it pits everyone against each other and tears the community apart. You make sure that doesn't happen by giving people a say in what a potential amalgamated municipality looks like. I also, for your sake, I did include the 2001 a transition board report from the city of Hamilton at its creation. And there's some interesting things about governance, about the cost structure and all of those things that they did. Some opportunities I think to learn from what happened there if amalgamation is what is to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and we appreciate the submission.
Just a couple of things. You talked about special purpose bodies running services. What's your view on accountability of people for their services with special purpose bodies?
So it's interesting. I think that when you look at the library as an example, if there are 12 municipalities here that have IT and communications and their own individual, there is the possibility of improving. And as you touched on, if there's a limited amount of money, there is the possibility of improving efficiencies and outcomes by coming together. The question is, does 12 need to come together to one, or can it be 6 and 6? I think that.
That's not the question I'm asking you.
Okay.
I'm asking you about accountability for services. You were, at your beginning of your presentation, you talked about
Yes.
service bodies, which takes them out of the hands of elected people and creates special purpose bodies. I'm curious what your view is on accountability for the public relative to special purpose bodies.
So the purpose of an elected official, whether it be at the regional level, the municipal level, the provincial level, or the federal level, is to represent and to make decisions in the best interests of the municipality. We all know that a council, whether it's a regional council or a city council, has a bureaucracy that supports it, that they can choose, as Grimsby did recently, to part ways with their city manager and replace that infrastructure, replace that bureaucracy. At the end of the day, the regional council, the local council is in charge of all that happens in the municipality through their oversight of the bureaucracy.
My question to you is that you talked about shared services and using
Yes.
special purpose bodies to deliver services.
Yes.
Those aren't directly elected people. Those are bodies set up outside the political structure. So I'm asking what your view is on accountability for services.
I think the accountability remains because the accountability rests with the public officials. As the chair of Waterloo Region, you recall the difficulties that happened relating to the LRT there. And there were some staff that were on side, some staff that weren't on side. As time goes on, the elected people have the ability to lead a municipality, a regional or a single-tier municipality moving forward. They have the single responsibility for the bureaucrats, the bureaucracy that actually runs the government.
I'm talking about special purpose bodies, not the staff. You're talking about special purpose bodies that are formed outside of the municipal structure to run a service, who aren't elected, who are appointed by other people. So I'm asking what your view is, whether services should be operated by people who are elected or by people who are appointed who aren't directly accountable.
I think I didn't use the word special purposes bodies. The government of Canada has something called Shared Services Canada, which is basically something that comes together that runs the services. The elected officials still have responsibility for who sits on Shared Services Canada, and ultimately a regional council or a single-tier municipality would have responsibility for who is employed by the region, by the city, that ultimately moves those things forward.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Betty Conk. Betty, are you here?
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Betty. Can you introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Sure. My name is Betty Conk. I live in Port Colborne. I also own property in Wainfleet. I was an elected alderman in Wainfleet for the past 2 terms, which I believe gives me a unique perspective on this governance issue, as I have been able to see it from both sides of the local horseshoe. I am offering an idea that I have been talking about for the last 8 years, and an idea that's widely held in the southern tier of the region. This idea is one that is not talked too loudly about, and you might ask what that is. The previous gentleman kind of touched on it. I think we need to do away with the region altogether. If it is ridding the province of elected officials and the costs associated with it, here's an opportunity to do just that. With 32 regional councillors being paid approximately $40,000 a year, that would save $1.2 million a year, and over a term, $5.12 million. This is a level of government that isn't needed and is costing the southern tier taxpayer far too much in terms of less infrastructure, and what infrastructure we do have is falling into disrepair because we are sending almost 50% of our tax dollars to the region. The notion of a one Niagara, in my estimation, is ludicrous. There are 12 main streets, not one. So please, don't go down that road, or the communities along the Lake Erie shoreline will be even further behind, those communities being Fort Erie, Port Colborne, and Wainfleet. You want to hear about governance, service delivery, and decision-making. In my estimation, the governance here at the regional level is almost non-existent. There are too many elected officials sitting around this horseshoe, too many cooks in the kitchen, so to speak. Then you add in party politics, which shouldn't happen, but it does, and you have a recipe for disaster that this region is. 13 is the appropriate number of elected officials to sit at this table, one for each municipality and one as a chair. Currently, the southern tier, which is comprised of Fort Erie, Port Colborne, Wainfleet, and Welland, is outnumbered at this table and therefore not ever on an equal footing. The best thing the province can do for this area is to dissolve the region, and the second best scenario would be to have a North Niagara and a South Niagara. Service delivery is great if you live in the bigger cities in the north, but if you live in the southern tier, not so much. The municipalities in the southern tier do not have as many long-term care facilities, for instance, and in Wainfleet there are none. Regional transit is a joke. If you live in the southern tier and you have a job, trying to get there is impossible. And again, Wainfleet doesn't even have a bus that goes there. In Wainfleet, they have EMS for 10 hours a day, while the rest of the region enjoys 24/7 service. In Port Colborne, they've been asking the region to repair a regional road that meets with a railway track to make the transition less bumpy over the tracks for vehicles to pass over for at least 2 years, perhaps longer, and still nothing in sight for this repair to take place. I wouldn't call that great service delivery by any means. Decision-making is fraught with too many partisan politics and outright grandstanding. Last term, our council got nothing done, and the reason is that there are simply too many bodies sitting around the table. Most of the council from the last term were swept out of office, and so far the new council doesn't seem to be any better in getting those decisions made in a timely fashion. It has taken them several months to deliberate on safety measures on a bridge in St. Catharines, which seems to be a draw for people in distress to come to take their lives. How does it take that long to make a decision when they were presented with indisputable facts about the need for safety barriers? I can tell you it is because there are just too many people sitting around the table with too many agendas of their own instead of what is best for the region as a whole. To sum it up for you, this governance of this region is horrible and has been for quite some time. Service delivery is horrible and in some instances non-existent. How is that possible when we are all supposed to be part of the big family of the Niagara region? Last but not least, the decision-making by these elected officials leave a lot to be desired. It is time to do away with this unwieldy region and take us back to looking after ourselves and eliminating a level of government that should never have been put together in the first place. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak about this governance issue.
So tell us what your ideal governance would be. Do away with the region, what should take its place?
I think each municipality just simply needs to look after itself. Like I mentioned, we send almost 50% of our property tax dollars to the region, and in the lower tier, southern tier rather, I don't particularly see any bang for our buck. It basically all is spent in the northern tier.
So how would that operate? So would you have 12 EMS services, 12 social service departments, 12 roads departments, 12, I'm not sure what sewage treatment you've got, or 12 water?
Well, as the gentleman before me alluded to, shared services are something that each municipality could reach out to their sister community. I mean, it's already happening. Welland has an agreement with Thorold for purchasing power for what, I'm not sure, but it was in the paper recently. So I think each municipality, I mean, we all looked after ourselves before the region was put in place. There's nothing wrong with a municipality simply looking after itself. And if they need help from a neighboring community, okay, so put together an agreement. We don't need the region to be Big Brother. We don't.
I'm just having a hard time visualizing how that operates. So how would your different services operate individually?
Well, each municipality could take out an agreement with Niagara Regional Police, for instance, or EMS, again, for instance. It's not rocket scientry here. It's simply a local municipality and a local council looking after their own municipality. And if we were able to keep that 46 cents on every dollar that we send to the region, we'd have more money to do infrastructure projects that in Port Colborne we currently can't do because there's no money. It's all coming here, and what are we getting for it? We're getting nothing.
But your 46 cents is paying for policing, EMS, social services,
But in
all
some
those things.
instances, like Wainfleet, they don't have we get 1.5 police officers, and sometimes we don't even get that. When we call for help, it takes them forever to get there, as opposed to having how many police officers here in the city of St. Catharines? Yes, I get that it's a bigger municipality, but there's no equality here for the 12 municipalities that make up the region. If there was, I probably wouldn't be standing here and talking about it, but there isn't. The southern tier is being left behind. That's as simple as I can make it. So like I said, the second best scenario would be to divide the north from the south. And that way, the southern tier communities can look after themselves. They could, again, make a shared agreement with the Police Services Board, the EMS services, public health, and they would be not so much an amalgamation, but just each municipality looking after itself, with the 4 mayors getting together on a monthly basis to see how are we doing and what do we need to do as a group.
I have a follow-up question. I spent some time a little while ago traveling along the southern tier municipalities, Fort Erie, Welland, Port Colborne, and Wainfleet, just looking at the windshield survey kind of experience, which is not scientific, but gives you a picture of the communities that you're dealing with. One of the things that struck me is that probably there are some big challenges as the economy restructures, and those municipalities certainly have a number of challenges that face them. I guess you may have partially answered the question in response to Mr. Seeling's question, but it struck me that that there needed to be some focus of attention, some pooling of resources, some broader vision of where that whole part of the Niagara region is going. And to be candid, having everybody go back to where we were in the old county system didn't strike me as the right solution, but I guess I'm interested in your view of what the future of those municipalities is, leaving aside structure. Just how do you see that evolving?
Well, if we were to divide the region into the north and the south, I believe that those municipalities, Fort Erie, Port Colborne, Welland, Wainfleet, maybe Pelham, I'm not sure how that falls out, but I believe they would be able to work more closely together with those shared ideas on how to promote the Lake Erie shoreline. It's been talked about for a number of years, particularly when I was on council in the last 2 terms. We never got anything in Wainfleet. There was never any promotion of Wainfleet from the regional level. We've talked about the south coast of the region, but nothing's ever been done with it because the focus is on the bigger cities in the region, and I understand that. I get that. There's more people here. There's more population here in St. Catharines and Niagara Falls, but there's also population below, south of Highway 20, and that doesn't ever seem to be taken into consideration when some of the big decisions are being made here. And I alluded to it earlier in my presentation. We do not have the same level of representation from the lower tier, from the southern tier, that they do in the north. That's not fair and it's not right. So I have heard that the thought process is to get rid of 5 regional councillors. It's not enough. It needs to be a level playing field. 1 municipal representative for each of the 12 municipalities and 1 chair. That way it's an even, everybody's on an equal footing. I don't see how else we can do it.
2 quick observations. One is that your observation that a whole lot of people making a decision makes it harder to make a decision. I don't think there's anybody in the room who would disagree with that notion. In terms of affinity, would you say that Wainfleet has more affinity to West Lincoln and the municipalities north and west of you?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. West Lincoln has some. Wainfleet has absolutely no infrastructure with regards to wastewater and water. Parts of West Lincoln are the same, and we do have a shared agreement with our drainage inspectors, so they're already in a shared program with a couple of things as well. So yes, West Lincoln would be probably more like Wainfleet than any of the other municipalities, although Port Colborne, the previous mayor from Port Colborne used to call Wainfleet Ward number 5. So if there was ever to be an amalgamation, I think Port Colborne amalgamating with Wainfleet is probably what most people would expect, but an amalgamation with West Lincoln would also work, if that's the route that's being looked at.
Just one last question.
Sure.
When I take a look at the expenditures and scale of the operation, do you think Wayne Fleet is sustainable long-term?
Absolutely, for sure it is. I mean, currently, like I've mentioned before, we are the same as every other municipality in the region. We ship off 46 cents on every dollar here to the region. We don't have water, wastewater. We don't have buses that come. We don't have any long-term care facilities. Public health comes occasionally to do teeth cleaning and whatever. So if we were able to keep that 46 cents on every dollar, we wouldn't have to go to the province to help us fix our roads and bridges. We'd be able to do most of that on our own. And most of the residents in Wainfleet, they don't want city services. They want to be left alone and they want to remain rural. So yes, I believe wholeheartedly that Wainfleet would be able to stand on its own, for sure.
Thank you very much. Our next registered speaker is Patrick Tuns, representing the One Niagara Now group. Patrick, you here? And if you would
I am not Patrick Tuns.
Okay, well, if you would introduce yourself and your group, please.
Yes, my name is Jack Lightstone. I'm a academic and former university administrator, and I have worked here in Niagara for 13 years. I'm accompanied by Mike Watt, who is handing out some documents. He is a 30-year veteran of Walker Industries, one of the major corporations in the Niagara region and beyond. And he is executive vice president of one of their divisions, Walker Environmentals. And with me as well, and behind me to my right, to your left, is Donald Zeraldo, a pioneer of the grape and wine industry in the Niagara region, known to many people. So thank you for the opportunity to express our views. We represent a not-for-profit organization, One Niagara Now, which is a consortium of 50 business leaders and professionals who live and work in Niagara. We share an assessment of Niagara's challenges and a common view of a local governance structure that would offer the greatest likelihood of helping address these challenges, and that is one tier, one city of Niagara. Our current tier multiple municipal structure is about 50 years old. 50 years ago, Niagara's economy was still strong. In the mid-50s, Welland and Port Colborne had among the highest average per capita incomes in Ontario. The Welland Canal, inexpensive electricity generated in Niagara, and the proximity to the American heartland spawned a rich industrial mix along the banks of the canal, an economic base that far outstripped the contribution to prosperity of agriculture and tourism in those days. In such a prosperous environment, the boundary and jurisdictional divisions created by 12 municipalities and a regional entity with 126 elected politicians, only 4 of whom are full-time, mattered less than they do today in a very different economic environment. Global forces have changed Niagara's economic position, notwithstanding our strategic location adjacent to Canada's largest mega-region and being one of Canada's most significant logistical corridors between Canada and the United States. We are significantly underperforming as a region within this economic zone. Our unemployment rate is higher, our demographic growth is stunted, we are poorer, older, and sicker than people in comparable regions. Public sector employment has proportionally grown, and while tourism, cultural tourism, agro-tourism industries have grown over the years, they are also well known to provide many part-time, lower-paid jobs. In the current environment, the boundary and jurisdictional divisions created by 12 municipalities and a regional entity and 126 elected politicians make coherent and unified economic strategizing and planning and the coordinated implementation of those plans in partnership with both public sector institutions and private sector difficult. For those considering business development in Niagara, the fragmentation and coherence of bylaws, policies, interpretations of regulations, and administrative processes across jurisdictional boundaries that are almost meaningless in economic and social terms are beyond frustrating to many. These incoherencies, coupled with what is sometimes interjurisdictional competition, are disincentives to invest in Niagara for anyone other than those experienced, well experienced in Niagara's complex jurisdictional matrix. It is not only business and economic development that is negatively impacted. It is core services like road plowing in the winter, firefighting services, water services, and public transportation, to name just 4 examples, that are less than optimal. The dossier that we are leaving with you is replete with anecdotes of lived experiences of 50 people who have shared their stories with us, illustrating the negative effects of the incoherencies that seem baked into our current governance structure. We need a governance structure that, among other things, offers, for example, one service provider and no service gaps, one planning and economic development function, one coordinated public transportation provider, one development charge and common interpretations of building codes, one affordable housing and social services provider, one growth strategy, one infrastructure improvement and replacement plan, one all-star administrative team, and one powerful voice to forge one relationship with the GTHA, and the bi-national mega region that stretches from Oshawa through to Rochester, New York. How can any number other than 1 be more effective than all of the above mentioned functions? How can any number of municipalities other than one city of Niagara, be better able to plan, nurture, support, and achieve these ends? Not 4, not 3, not 2, 1. Consequently, we propose that Niagara's governance be comprised of 1 tier with 1 city, with between 4 and 6 full-time, not part-time, ward councillors for each of the 4 provincial ridings in the Niagara region, and 1 mayor, that is between 17 and 25 full-time politicians. This would provide representational balance between north and south, east and west, rural and urban. It would permit our politicians the time to build greater expertise and to respond to residents' concerns. Will this cost the taxpayers less? Perhaps not, based upon what has happened elsewhere, but it will offer the greatest opportunity to bring greater coherence to the system for the benefit of the greatest number of people. Some may express fear of loss, were we to become one municipality, loss of a sense of community, or loss of a sense of ready access to nearby help and services. Concerning the former, we note that there are other more important means of sustaining a sense of community and endowing it with a sense of belonging, other than giving it municipal status. Is that not the case now with Beamsville or Jordan or Fenwick or Chippewa or many other communities that 50 years ago ceased to be municipalities? The same may be said of access to services and help from municipal officials. All of these can be dealt with within the structure of one city of Niagara, but the opposite is not the case. The coherence that we need to prosper cannot be readily created in any other structure other than one city. Our view of the less than optimal current structure is not a negative commentary on the people, politicians, or administrative that work within it. They are dedicated, talented, and well-intentioned. It is the structure within which they work that is the issue, and that in which their predecessors worked, going back 50 years. That is what is at fault. And if you were to say that the current structure will overcome these obstacles, we may say in response, if that were realistic, it would have happened by now, after almost 50 years. My colleagues, Mike Watt, want to add a few points, and then we'll happy to entertain your questions.
Yeah, quickly, and thank you for your time. I think Fred Eisenberger actually said it best when he was here on Friday for a governance discussion, and he was asked by the panel whether having a single tier was a major factor in economic development in Hamilton, and he responded absolutely unconditionally yes. And I think although Hamilton went through its trials and tribulations, we see a much better economic engine there, and this is about the future of Niagara. And it's hard to understand from a business point of view why Halton and Hamilton are doing so much better than Niagara right now. So just kind of wrapping up, I think the main issues for us here, the number one would be economic development and strategy related to economic development. This is the real big nut that we think we can win on here in Niagara. We have no coordinated strategy right now, and we talked to that in the document. Two-tier planning is a major issue here. Regional government never goes against the decision of a local government, so why do we have two-tier planning? Makes no sense to us. Transit, We've been working on transit here, amalgamated transit for many years. We still don't have it. We feel that a single city would be the way to go on that. Social issues and poverty, we have a 13-year waiting list for affordable housing, according to Niagara Regional Housing. So there needs to be a concerted strategy on that. And above that, tourism, many agencies doing the same thing, trying to market different parts of this region. I think a concerted tourism strategy would make that much better. And the previous speaker talked about, I think you were alluding to the question about the special purpose vehicles. There's some talk about 3 cities and having a special purpose vehicle to do with common shared services. My company does work across Canada, and I've been a victim of some of those kind of shared service networks in many jurisdictions, and I don't see them working very well, and accountability is an issue. I think about Halifax, I think about Windsor. There are other areas where there are shared service models that don't seem to be performing very well, and accountability does seem to be lacking in those instances. So I think we'll leave it at that, and certainly open to questions.
I wonder if Mr. Giraldo would like to make a comment.
Just simply that it's business-wise a pretty logical explanation. This idea that's floating around about 4 communities replacing the one. I was born in St. Catharines. I don't particularly want to change my passport to read Canal City, for example. And as I travel around the world, I only use 2 handles, Canada and Niagara. People get it. It's a branding exercise that'll be extremely useful for us to attract business in the community. It was pointed out the region is suffering from economic depression, I'll call it that. And if we unified together and tried to sell ourselves to the world and bring some knowledge industry to the area, I think that's fundamentally what this is all about. The other structural information governance has been addressed properly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
I think you've covered most of the points that we have an interest in, and we have your material to review. If we have questions or on any of this, we will get back to you. Thank you very much for bringing this together.
I didn't quite pick up on your size of council. Did you say 4 or 5 per riding? Did I hear that right?
That's correct.
Yes,
For a
in other words,
council,
there were 4 provincial ridings here. They already provide equity in terms of population representation. So if you had between 4 and 6 wards per each riding, you would have roughly equitable representation from north, south, east, west, urban, rural. And you would have a council of between 17, with the mayor, 17 and 25 people, which will be instead of 126, they would be all full-time. They would be devoting their full-time expertise to the issues at hand, to develop the region economically and to provide services. And they would be accountable. And it would be a much more efficient form of decision-making than what we possibly have now. Or for that matter, a more efficient and accountable form of decision-making than having 4, 3, or 2 municipalities with some sort of shared services boards.
Thank you, Mr. Lifeson.
Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Our next registered speaker is Ann Jenkins, who represents the Ontario Municipal Employees Coordinating Committee and CUPE, Ontario. And if you could introduce, if you're here, if you could introduce yourself and anyone who is joining you at the podium, and we have allocated 10 minutes for your organization.
Perfect, thank you so much. So good morning, advisors and community members. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today on the Municipal Government Review. My name is Ann Jenkins, and I am a municipal worker in the City of Hamilton. And this is my CUPE brother, Kyle Hoskins, who is a municipal worker in St. Catharines, but resides in Welland. I'm also the chair for the municipal workers for CUPE Ontario, and we represent approximately 80,000 employees. These 80,000 municipal workers do a variety of jobs in our communities. These workers work in water, wastewater, roads, parks, planning, public health, libraries, childcare, social services. They repair and install traffic lights, lifeguards, recreation workers for children and seniors. These workers keep our streets clean and safe, and they do many, many more jobs in our town to keep our cities working every day. I know it's a big list and it's not all of them, but I just want people to get an idea of the municipal work that we do. So when I was reviewing, things about Niagara, because I don't live here, but Kyle, come up here. We have a good relationship, and so I did some research and found out that low-income families are more than 18% are made up of the region, and that number is on the rise. We need quality, integrated, and well-funded community services in order to reverse this and to support those families. This number will increase and drive increased costs of services like public health that is could possibly downloaded to the municipalities. Municipalities are already well-run organizations, especially considering that they operate on 10 cents on every tax dollar, and they are very complex organizations. Municipalities, I guess in my opinion, are the have-not level of the government. As of 2017, there was a $4.9 billion shortfall through to 2027 to maintain services and infrastructure needs. This challenge simply amplifies because municipal governments do not receive the same level of supports that other levels of governments do, and I sourced that from AMO. So the recent provincial budget cuts demonstrates this well, as it contains cuts to core services like public health, library, and possibly EMS. Niagara is not overrepresented. The provincial government has already interfered with municipal elections, and it would be a shame for this process to further limit the local representation. Local government is the most relevant and closest to the residents. It is through, and I read that in analysis from a Brock University paper, that the 13 municipalities in this region, there's an average of 10 councillors, and that's really not too much considering the volume of residents. In the same analysis, it was imagined that if an entire region was a ward system, a council would be reduced to 32 seats. This would see, for example, Wainfleet going down to one representative, and St. Catharines moving down to 7. It's hard to see how residents could get effective service by this happening. We have unique communities in this region, and each one plan and deliver their services to reflect their local needs. The smaller communities allow for councils to be nimble and to conduct local business quicker, easier, and to make sure that they're meeting the needs and wants of their residents. Amalgamation, will probably cost more in the long run, and the representation to community residents will be less. I come from Hamilton, and in 2000 we had the amalgamation, and I live in one of the smaller communities that amalgamated into the big city of Hamilton, and many of us, well, more than many, I would say probably 90% of our residents there feel like we got lost. So, and the government is already making several adjustments to services and communities that we rely on. This also may lead to contracting out services, which we know cost more money, and it'll be the taxpayer that has to make up that cost. I know that the province is looking for efficiencies. I guess for me, I kind of think that maybe we have a revenue problem more than we have a spending problem. So if we can figure out how to make more revenue, it would help us be able to deliver the services more efficiently. Anything? That's it.
I just have one question, a comment you made. Why do you make the assumption that amalgamations mean contracting out? Or maybe I misinterpreted what you said.
Well, I think because, do you want to answer this?
Have you experienced that in Hamilton?
It did. Some of that did happen there. But I think that we worry that when you say the word efficiencies right away, it means cuts. And if we're going to cut the boundaries and, services aren't going to be, if we dovetail them, that could be job loss, right? Or to save money, maybe they're going to contract them out. Like, none of that is clear, and it's very worrisome for workers.
I'm just being devil's advocate here for a minute.
Go ahead.
Do you not think that smaller, less viable municipalities will be forced into more contracting out if they're forced into efficiencies and funding gets cut back?
Here in Niagara, I don't think we've seen all that much gain in either savings or increased efficiencies by actually contracting out the services. In fact, I mean, there's some prime examples of how contracting out services, some really good examples here in Niagara, of how contracting out services actually dramatically reduced service levels and actually dramatically increased the costs. I
Can you
haven't
cite
seen
an example?
Due to my employment, I will reserve that.
Can I ask one of the questions that came up in some of the other sessions where your colleagues, your brothers and sisters from CUPE made presentations? One of the things that obviously we're interested in is, given the environment, the fiscal environment, and the interest that you correctly identified, that people want to improve efficiencies, and that does obviously have areas of concern for people that represent labor. What is your experience in working with the existing municipal structure in achieving service improvements, service efficiencies, cost reductions, things of that kind?
One of the great things that we have in Niagara is like our water and wastewater, most of these in the upper tier, EMS is in the upper tier, public housing is in the upper tier. I probably spent hours and hours last night even picking my brain all through the last couple of weeks up until here, trying to think of any types of duplications or overlapping of services, and I really can't think of all that many ways which we overlap services.
Well, you referenced water and wastewater. Niagara has an arrangement that is somewhat unique among the regional municipalities of having local water and wastewater sort of on the distribution and collection side, and then the more wholesale functions at the regional level. Do you see any opportunities there?
Not that I can really see, because the lower tiers have their part, and then the upper tier has theirs. It's not really necessary for a duplication, and I don't think there'd be any savings if we see some of the collective agreements move up. We could actually see increased costs.
You're suggesting with amalgamation that the collective bargaining moves the wage rates to the higher level. Is that what you're saying?
In some cases, that may happen. Yes.
If they have good representation, presumably.
They do.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's pretty cute. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next scheduled presentation on behalf of the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake is our councillors Stuart McCormick and Gary Burrows. Are you folks here? You may not need to be useful to the group. Introduce yourselves.
Pardon?
To
Yes,
the audience, please.
certainly. First of all, I'd like to thank you both for putting on this very, very important issue in our community. My name is Gary Burrows, and this is Stuart McCormick. We're both town councillors from the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. And today we are presenting, and the documents that you've received are a culmination of all of council and many residents of Niagara-on-the-Lake. So what we're trying to do is present our collective thoughts on this issue. To start with, we believe that our region is different from the other regions, probably just as the other regions believe, due to the size, the 12 municipalities, and no obvious main city. Many of us went through the amalgamation of 1970 and the review in the early 2000s. In all fairness, our 5 communities that were amalgamated in 1970 are still as vibrant and distinct as they were before amalgamation. As outlined in the executive summary, Niagara-on-the-Lake is a thriving community based on 3 pillars: culture and significant history, agriculture, and tourism. And many times the tourism numbers that are presented publicly are the Niagara Falls tourism numbers. We have over 3.1 million visitors each year, and often they are not the same visitors that are going to Niagara Falls. So we can get more detail on that. When we're discussing amalgamation, there's a few issues that have been discussed and should be considered. The number of elected officials versus the cost of the elected officials. And I believe that it's certainly going to cost more with any form of amalgamation because many of the town councilors in each or city councilors in our region are not, they're paid as part-time. They do provide far better representation to the residents that we all represent. And as an example, I'd like to give you the issue of firefighters. In any form of amalgamation, many of our communities use volunteer firefighters. In our community, we have 108 volunteer firefighters, three of which are paid full-time. So in getting at that, it's not just the fact that we're getting excellent service from a lot of our community volunteering, but also the community benefits from having that interaction with 108 residents of our community. So there's a lot of benefits, and the cost, of course, will not only move to a paid position, but in determining what their wage will be, the collective number will be far higher in all of our communities. And certainly, if there was an amalgamation, we would not have five fire stations. And we believe that it's a necessity because even in our community, we do the high-level rescue work, we do highway work, we do town work as well. So we cover a lot of bases that won't be covered under any amalgamation. Certainly there is the issue of a shared services board if amalgamation is being considered. And we almost have that now. I think it needs to be refined. But issues like police, water, wastewater, those just simply can't be handled by any of the small communities and should be a shared service. Maintaining the vigorous rules that each of those bodies have is just too much for any of the small communities, and that's back in the 1970 amalgamation, we had our own police force. It was not practical, and certainly in the water, wastewater, the way it works now, there's a wholesale rate to each of our communities, and then there's a separate local rate to handle the local pipes to each person's home. So it's a good system the way it is and should be considered as a shared service. The other issue that we wanted to bring up was what kind of amalgamation would be considered. I've heard the one city, I've heard the river city, canal city, and other. There's also the lake cities and then some other combination. And I believe when amalgamation is being considered, that we try and relate to the individuals that are in it, not just the numbers. The similarities in our case, if it was a river city, Fort Erie, Niagara Falls, and Niagara Lake, are not similar as municipalities. Going the other way, Niagara Lake, St. Catharines, and Lincoln, sorry, thanks, Brian. have far more similarities. We have the green belt. We have much more similar cultural opportunities and quite a bit of history as well. So that's one of the things to consider. And where there are financial gains to be found, how do they affect the representation and service that is provided by the current system? And I know as we try and get smaller and smaller, we sort of forget that the residents of our communities are the ones that may have issues come up. And they're the ones that, as an elected official, we are all representing. And the more difficult it is for residents to get assistance on any issue that they might have is not a good system. So I think we're saying that have a very careful look at that, because certainly it's not about cost. It will cost more if it's an amalgamated operation of any form. And my last comment is, how do we transition to any new arrangement? And we've seen the Big Bang approach in Toronto. I'm sure everybody believes that it's working, but I believe that taking some time, it's been 50 years the way it is. I'm not saying that change isn't required, but taking some time to make that change happen in a positive way for all the residents of the Niagara region. In summary, we are pleased to have this review and appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to working with the province to make our communities even stronger. Hopefully, whatever decisions are made, there will be a healthy transition for all the residents involved, which I've already mentioned. And thank you, and we're happy to have any questions you have.
You want to add anything?
No, I'm just here as eye candy. And for a note of humor on what I'm sure is a very long day for you.
Appreciate it.
But if you have some questions, I'm happy to try and answer them.
I was trying to understand your comments on the fire service, that
Yes.
you would lose services in an amalgamation or
Well,
regionalization.
my understanding, there are several municipalities within the region now that have fully professional fire service at a great cost to their communities. And all the smaller ones have a volunteer, mostly 100%, but at least a component of volunteer service. And so the cost is, we can handle the cost in the smaller, we're a very small community. We can handle that cost on the local level for the local taxpayer, but we could not handle a fully professional service because of the cost. What would happen in Niagara Lake, for example, instead of 5 fire stations, we would probably go down to like 2. And whether we could then still serve the highway or the Niagara River Rescue work would be certainly questionable.
Sorry,
But
if I can just add one thing to clarify. I think Gary's point was, in the event that you have a mega amalgamation, what ends up happening with respect to harmonization is wages typically go up. They don't usually go down. So the volunteers which we presently have will end up getting converted in one form or another to full-time employees. The other thing, I apologize about this because you've heard the word used 1,000 times. The other thing that's unique about the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake is the level of volunteerism that exists there, not just with respect to the firefighters, but with respect to the Lions Club, with respect to the Rotary Club, with respect to all of the service organizations that are there. And the fear is that to the extent that you go from a volunteer to a paid situation, you're losing that element of engagement that exists in the town.
But there are composite fire departments now, aren't there? Not necessarily in Niagara, but in many other communities, there are composite fire departments of volunteers and.
Yes, absolutely, and they have to follow all the training requirements that they are given. A lot of training that every Monday night, they go through very vigorous training and meet the standards of the fire service.
And on a practical level, we have 5 fire stations, none of which have accommodation in them at the present time. So if you go with a composite model, at some point in time, you're going to have to build 2 new fire stations, or at least 2 new fire stations, because we have no accommodation built into those.
Well, I think you're making some assumptions, but at any rate. My other question, Gary, you sat in this chair and you sat out here and you
Yes.
sat locally.
Yes?
Do you think mayors should sit on regional council?
That's a very good question. When I was a mayor, I thought that was important because I should have been the transition between the action that took place up here at the region, getting back to local council and on all the issues that affected us. And that was the theory right from the beginning. That's what mayors would do. I'm not sure it's been overly successful over the years, including my 10 years as Lord Mayor, of getting the message back. The goal at that time was to try and see if there were any grants that might be at the region that we could apply for, but not that good transition between notifying the local body as much as maybe we are doing now.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So this brings us to the end of our morning roster of speakers. We're going to take a half-hour break, and we will reconvene at 12:30. I think we're going to get started, if people can take their places. Our first registered deputation is Oscar Jose Bordenave. Is he here? If you would come forward and introduce yourself to the audience, you will have 5 minutes as shown up on the board here.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yeah. My name is Oscar Jose Bordenave, London immigrant in 1972, working with the labor movement now for so many years, finally, with the 1982 reform of charter rights. Okay, thank you for having the opportunity, and not too many times I can be here. Perhaps the concept of having a regional government is a good idea, but only in time of bonanza. Right now, with all the levels of the government working on deficit, we have no choice but to cut expenses. We have no money whatsoever. Regional council cost us $1.4 million a year, plus extra mileage, conventions, hotel meals, etc. And when I see more people on the street, they have no houses, they are homeless, seniors without dental plans or dental eyes, mental care, that means we are having more poverty here now. Something is not working. Something is not working. So we need a change, big change, perhaps a very painful one, but we had no money to affront anything else. We had to downsize, reducing operation costs, amalgamate all the municipality under the Ministry of Municipalities Affairs. But right now, what we have, and council here know, in our head are 3 or 4 or 5 lawsuits for millions of dollars here. The people are, for the old, what's the name, Mr. Caslin time, they are lawsuits for millions of dollars. We have no money. I don't know. What I know that it's very hard to maintain my house now. Electricity is up, everything is up. Okay, let's go to the second one, decision making. Regardless how the argument can be, we, the citizens, are the decision makers. To do so, we need information, transparency, honesty, and no partisan councils. We don't want any partisan political party or religion. This has to be innocuous, has to be neutral. You just follow the law, the Charter of Rights. That's what we have to do. We elect our representative to work in the citizen benefits only. Okay, let's go for the delivery. So far, we haven't get any data for the region. We are just keep in the dark. We know there was an increased salary, the council vote in service. We know there was behind doors meetings, but information to us, none. So unless we know what we are, I don't know what to say. We cannot duplicate service. We have to keep the law, only that is what saves us. My opinion, just to finish. In 1982 reform, we worked very hard to have all the religion treated the same way, the same duty, the same right. So religion has no place here, none. It's against the law. And discrimination, racism, hate crime, and all that had to be channeled to the Justice Department. No one here had the authority to be a judge. And remain only governance, to see roads, bridges, how do you say, infrastructure, but leave alone not religion or political stuff. Just concentrate and downsize, lower the cost, because we are in problem. We are in bankruptcy now. Niagara Regional Police has no money. Nobody has money. They have no job. A few jobs we have in the farmland are filled by migrant workers, Mexican or Jamaican. I don't know. That's my exposure to you and my concerns. Very hard now, after 20 years in retirement, very, very hard to maintain this system. In accordance with the folk arts, what's this? Communities. 25% of the people in Niagara region are receiving government help. They need it. If you ask teachers, they are getting paid by the province. And you are the OPP, they are getting paid. We have no money. We are in bankruptcy. It's nothing there. So how we solve this? Reducing costs. So thank you very much. Any questions?
No questions? No, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you again.
Our next speaker is Christine Lewis, representing Brock University. If you would come forward and introduce yourself and to the audience. And
Hi, my name is Christine. I'm 35 years old.
You aren't being heard in the rest of the room. You need to speak up.
Oh, sorry. Is this okay?
I think so.
Hello, my name is Christine Lewis. I'm here because I have some concerns. With decision making, I feel that with the CRA website, we do our taxes. I can go on there, I can check my refund, I can check my balance. And therefore, I feel that there should be a link for like regional governments for voting on that website, because it is confidential and sometimes people can't leave their houses. Okay. Another thing with all this Westlink and Grimsby, Hamilton did amalgamation, correct? Is that something that you guys would be looking into?
We're not reviewing Hamilton's amalgamation, but the topic of municipal structure is certainly legitimately part of our mandate.
Okay. And another thing is affordable housing. Another city, Hamilton, for example, has a housing initiative where they created a homelessness committee, and they have a plan to eliminate homelessness by a certain time frame. For example, I believe it's 2020. And how they're doing it is with developers. So, for example, 15% of developed land needs to be dedicated to the parkland, which is dedicated to the city. For example, to eliminate the housing need and to get families into homes, I feel that maybe if 15%, not only parkland, but affordable homes made to the minimum standards of the bylaw, dedicated to the city for reduction of homelessness would also benefit Niagara region as well. And another thing is you could give incentives to developers. For example, property tax breaks, permit breaks on the affordable housing units. I don't know if you guys do that, but it would be in with policy, would have to be done with policy. And whatever else, let me think here. Yeah, I think I have gotten everything across.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions? You didn't explain who you're affiliated with or the basis on which you come to be.
I am a graduate of Mohawk College, Urban and Regional Planning. I do go to Brock University for business communications.
I see. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So was your question about online?
No.
What,
Voting online.
voting online?
Yes, through the CRA website, which is where we do our taxes online, which is a very stable, secure website because I use my banking information to log into it. So therefore, they know it's me, you know, because I can't make another CRA link website. So some people can't get out to vote. So let's just say they went to the library, let's just say had one of those like community project things where older people could go to the library and get help with voting. Therefore, because their mobile development isn't very well, they can't get out to the voting centers. So maybe if they could think of something like that, it might help with decision making as well. Thank you.
I think you'd find some of the Niagara municipalities through their clerk's offices run online voting for municipal elections in any event, so thank you.
But not federal.
But we're not doing federal.
Well,
Oh, okay. Thank you.
thank you. Our next registered speaker is Renata Ryan, who may not be with us now, so okay, we'll skip ahead. The next registered group is Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce, Mishka Balsam, and whoever is joining her. And can I ask our help and the helpers in the AV to boost the microphone volume, if that's, or is there some way to do that?
When you don't speak, this should be off, and then you'll come through much clearer, sir.
Thank you.
Just try it.
Sure.
Turn it off. Now let the gentleman, no, turn it off. Is it off? Okay, now when you speak, it should be fairly.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
Try yours.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4.
I guess it doesn't work.
I guess we'll go old school. Please speak up.
It's supposed to anyway.
Good afternoon, Mr. Sealing, Mr. Fenn, councillors, ministry staff, and members of the public. My name is Mishka Balsam, and I'm the CEO and President of the Greater Niagara Chamber of Commerce. With me today is one of Ontario's finest policy and government relations directors, and we are lucky to have him on our team, Hugo Cheshire. On behalf of Hugo Cheshire. On behalf of our members in the business community, thank you for inviting us to be here to offer our feedback on government reform. The GNCC represents approximately 1,500 members employing 50,000 people and is Niagara's largest business organization. The stakes of this consultation process are high. Democracy isn't easy and progress doesn't happen all at once, but we have the opportunity to do things better, maybe not perfect, but better. Niagara is a community with many strengths. $100 billion of trade flow across the US-Canada border annually. We benefit from being part of the Greater Golden Horseshoe mega region. Our region's agricultural assets allow for a timely supply to a mega market in close proximity. Niagara's international brand attracts 14 million visitors, and our abundant protected natural terrain and conservation areas predispose many to hope that Niagara is a guardian of its natural heritage. And the list goes on. For this consultation, we asked businesses for their input, and over 500 organizations responded. In broad terms, organizations are confident that Niagara's elected leaders are committed to their communities, and municipal services are delivered in accordance with what is likely the norm across Ontario. Issues have arisen primarily when municipal government in Niagara has been required to cooperate with each other or with the region. Economic and social health across Niagara varies, and the ability to provide needed services are inconsistent. It seems harder to build consensus, and this has created gridlock in decision-making. Such services include planning and development, public transportation, affordable housing, economic development, roads, and traffic. Nearly 80% of the survey respondents indicated that government's reform could produce an environment where solutions to the following issues could be addressed. Niagara's population growth. It has remained behind that in Ontario, Canada, and in comparable municipalities. Actual growth has fallen short of projections made in the past 50 years. With a population older than that of Ontario and Canada and getting older, Niagara must broaden its base of working-age people. With 13 local governments, we have been unable to create a unified immigration attraction or youth retention strategy, something much needed by employers across our region. Unemployment. Niagara is experiencing a consistently higher unemployment rate than the rest of the province. We are in need of a strong regional presence to market the entire Niagara area to prospective investors. Although we can build on our strengths of agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism, we must also strive to attract industries in which we are failing to build a presence. To attract the industries and the firms Niagara needs to grow, and to diversify, we need a single complementary economic development strategy and department. Transportation. For 10 years and longer, we have been unable to create a seamless transit system that meets the needs of our citizens and recognizes that people do not live, work, study, or shop in the same places or even in the same municipality. And transportation requirements are not limited to buses. We also need to maximize our connections to the wider world, including via rail, airports, the Welland Canal, and ports on both lakes. We require a unified, efficient, and effective transportation approach. Housing affordability. Recent increases in housing prices have resulted in decreased housing affordability. And when projects are caught up in red tape and burdensome compliance with two levels of government who are sometimes not consistent in their approaches, we can't address it. We need a single-tier planning department. And secondly, with a vacancy rate of less than 1%, we are in an affordable housing crisis. And if we add shelter and food bank usage, it indicates that we are in need of a single unified poverty reduction strategy. The most vulnerable in our society can't afford a gridlock in decision-making. Infrastructure backlogs. Revenue issues or economies of scale have resulted in increases in municipalities' infrastructure backlog. Municipal budgets range from a few million to just under 200 million. On the lower end of the scale are communities where 1% property tax increase would only yield an additional $57,000 per year. These communities would be hard-pressed to deal with the infrastructure backlog, the pressures of climate change on infrastructure, and industry challenges on their own. And we have larger communities that are landlocked with little to no opportunities in new land development. A common Niagara-wide approach is needed to address these issues. Niagara needs to attract new industries and employers and to help those that are here grow their businesses. Without strong job growth, we can't attract a greater population. Without population growth, our aging population will make prosperity difficult to achieve. I have attended a number of town halls on these issues, one hosted by MPP Oosterhoff. And what became clear is that we are more than 12 municipalities or 13 municipalities or more than 130 neighborhoods. We're at the same time one. We have common interests when it comes to our economy, social issues, our sustainability, our prosperity. In an era where local governments are expected to do more with less, we encourage this government, you as advisors, to commit to a governance model that allows for better methods of service delivery when it comes to planning, transportation, affordable housing, economic development, roads, and traffic. And lastly, we urge the government to mitigate costs as much as possible and to provide funding and revenue streams to municipalities who will have to bear any costs. With that, I would like to thank you on behalf of Niagara's business community for hearing us today, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Does your colleague wish to make any comments in addition?
No, I'm more of a policy wonk, so if you have any wonkus questions, I'll be happy to take those.
Too early for that, I think.
So can I ask you what model of governance your membership, that's probably not a fair question, do you have a sense of where your membership is in terms of a governance model?
I think there's great consensus on the services that we need to address and the lack of, and the issues that we have with some of the service delivery. I think that's where the consensus is. What I can say is that the GNCC was formed, our organization was formed 8 years ago. We're one of many Niagara-wide organizations that are actually there to address the issues that are Niagara-wide and to represent that. We have in 8 years grown from a membership of 1,200 to just nearly 1,600 that are there. We're the third largest chamber in Ontario, which speaks of a common voice on issues that are common across municipalities. The consensus that we have is on the service delivery that we need. But I'm going to pass it over to our policy expert.
Certainly, thank you. And essentially what we've focused on here is the important aspects of government where the rubber meets the road, if you will, that the businesses and citizens actually depend upon. And it's the service delivery that I think is the most important outcome. So having outlined the issues that we see, we're then looking for the mode of government that will best let us solve those issues and enhance those deliveries.
Just an observation, having heard some other chambers of commerce before, I think that the themes that are consistent, but because of the breadth of the membership, you're reluctant to take a voice on the model, but your model has to address all of these 6 areas, right? Whatever the model is, it's supposed to address all of these 6 areas you've outlined as critical.
Yes.
Maybe I can ask a question about your observation on the need for a Niagara-wide economic development strategy. Can you comment on what ingredients that might have, what kinds of themes it might reflect?
Well, essentially, a single economic development department would have a lot more resources and could specialize. So in Hamilton, there is a single economic development department, and as a result, they have a specialist economic developer for agri-food or for manufacturing, for example. And because of the fragmented nature of Niagara's economic development currently, there's no opportunity for that specialization. And some municipalities may only have one economic development officer, period, which makes it hard for us to attract the business that we want to bring here, especially if we're talking about advanced manufacturing, about enhancing agri-food and so on. And one of the issues that we see, as Mishka pointed out, with the unemployment rate is a key to solving that would be to just bring more employers here. And that's obviously a lot easier when you have a much more effective, single, well-funded, specialized economic development department.
I have a second question. Often when prospective investors are looking at a region, their first point of contact isn't necessarily the municipality, it's often the Chamber of Commerce because it's business-to-business kind of communications. What's been your experience in terms of outreach from non-Ontario prospective employers or investors in terms of Niagara's ability to compete with other regions in Ontario?
In some of the cases, the 2 areas where we hear and are being contacted most often have to do with the sector of manufacturing, smaller to mid-sized manufacturing, and the other one has to do with tourism. We seem to be known for those 2 clusters outside of the area, so I'm often being asked about information and expertise as it relates to those 2 areas. I think in all of the economic clusters that we are known for, I think we're touching them. I think we're touching them in many ways well. I think we have the opportunity to give each one of them more depth so that that expertise grows and we can actually export that expertise across North America. So I think that's where the opportunities are.
And do those prospective investors see Niagara as a region, or do they think in terms of St. Catharines, Niagara Falls, Welland? How do they approach it?
In most cases, what we do is we redirect them to the economic development of the Niagara region because they often have site-specific needs. And I think that we have found that historically the region can help them best. But also we have businesses coming forward and actually sharing their experience that they've had with one or another economic development department. And sometimes it's harder. It's harder for them the expectations are different. The information provided is different. The process time often is a critical issue of it, and it varies from one municipality to the other.
Thank you.
Just out of curiosity, who is best positioned to balance off the need to preserve fruit lands versus economic development?
I'd say probably the province because of the
I would think so too.
highway. And that's
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving us a second. Do you want to respond?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So after a very quick consultation, we think that's probably a question that's actually more in the hands of the province. because a large part of the issue that we see with the tender fruitlands being developed is because those developers that are moving there need access to the highway, which at this point happens to run through the northern part of the peninsula. Building a second highway would obviously be a provincial project, so that is the main thing that I think would move economic development away. So perhaps that answers your question. I think that's the main driver of development in the fruitlands.
Failing a provincial highway, who can best do it?
Failing the province to do it, who can best do it?
Well, I don't think that any municipality in Niagara would have the funds to build a new highway, certainly. So failing the province,
I'm not asking about building the highway, I'm asking about the protections.
Oh, the protections, right.
The region.
Yes,
It has
yeah.
to be the region, actually, in this case.
One last question then. We had a submission earlier about the economic prospects of the southern tier municipalities. The Greater Niagara Chamber covers those as well. Do you have any particular observations about their business communities?
It's a sensitive issue.
Yes.
There seems to be an economic discrepancy between the southern and northern part of our region. So if I pull them together, I think you would see that some of the opportunities in certain areas of Niagara differ from that of others. And I think that some of the communities will find a greater challenge to meet some of the economic needs, the infrastructure needs, and the social needs that are probably expected of them.
If I can just weigh in as well, I think one of the major success stories I've had in recent years in Niagara was the building of the GE plant, which was in Welland and was essentially a cooperative effort between multiple economic development departments. And that was certainly a boon for South Niagara, which it is located in. But I think that also speaks to the need for cooperation or amalgamation of economic development departments, because that's an example of what can be achieved. So in effect, perhaps what might be best for South Niagara would be actually a overarching economic development department that can bring more of that investment in.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation. Our next scheduled speaker on behalf of the Niagara-on-the-Lake Chamber of Commerce is Janice Thompson. Janice, are you here? Welcome. You have 10 minutes.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present today on behalf of the business community of the town of Niagara-on-the-Lake. I'm sure in your travels that you're hearing from every corner of the province that every small town is unique and that they need to be treated differently when it comes to discussions around government review. In the case of Niagara-on-the-Lake, we're a rural community with a population of fewer than 18,000 people. That's an increase, though, of 14% since 2011, so we are a growing small community. And we can back up the claim that we are indeed unique. We have an outlet mall that attracts more than 6 million visitors every year. And the town in general has a visitation of 3.5 million. Our town has demands placed on it, on its infrastructure, that are quite extraordinary for its small size and tax base. Currently, our regional government provides services related to policing, emergency medical services, social services, sewer, water, and assumes responsibility for some of our town roads. These services are provided in a very efficient manner. However, the cost to our individual taxpayers based on the high assessed value of our properties seems disproportionately high. Our property values are the highest in the region. The town, known as the first capital of Upper Canada, has a deep heritage and attracts visitors to enjoy the historic buildings and learn the stories of our past. Our industry is based strongly on agriculture, with a well-established tender fruit and grape growing industry that has fueled the establishment of a wine industry that makes all of us proud. VQA wines are served around the world, reflecting the bounty of Niagara's vineyards. With 42 wineries and 190 grape growers in Niagara-on-the-Lake, there is no question that this is a major focus on our local agricultural, manufacturing, and tourism industry. The enormous private investment in capital projects at wineries supports many jobs. Throughout the province, there are more than 18,000 jobs and $870 million in wages generated as a result of the wine and grape industry. Related to the successful wine industry is an outstanding reputation for culinary offerings that complement the efforts of the winemakers. In recent years, we have seen craft breweries being established, adding to the beverage industry offerings. Niagara-on-the-Lake's beautiful natural setting lends itself to touring programs for visitors to experience the wine, beer, and culinary offerings. Our businesses have developed sophisticated events to encourage repeat visitation to the area, with outdoor musical events, weddings, and product tastings, making the destination popular for special celebrations. This successful niche industry complements our cultural offerings, most notably the Shaw Festival, which led to the town's development as a destination for tourism, necessitating the creation of an accommodation and hospitality industry that serves visitor needs and encourages repeat business in the area. So how can a regional governance review help support our investors and hardworking entrepreneurs? We believe that the introduction of clarity within the planning, zoning, and bylaws to eliminate duplication within the two levels of government, and to introduce the opportunity to enshrine local guidelines that support local industry and cannot be overridden by a regional government. That's very important to us. If there would be a centralized regional planning department, ensure that there was a dedicated Niagara-on-the-Lake presence that could provide fast, accurate answers directly to investors. Ensure that industry is included in the process to define their working environment and not have potentially unworkable scenarios thrust on them by government entities. Recognize that one size does not fit all, and that the municipalities within our region are in fact different from one another. Agriculture and tourism are critical drivers in our town, so latitude needs to exist to allow the town to continue to flourish in these areas. Recognize that there is potentially a cost to homogenization of municipalities that may not serve the municipalities or the province in the goal of creating new jobs, increasing visitation, and expanding economic development. And lastly, we would ask that you continue to provide support for our educational institutions, Niagara College and Brock University, to maintain the flow of highly qualified graduates that keep our industries on the leading edge and provide a sustainable future for all. Thank you for the opportunity.
Dennis? You made reference to something just in passing that I'd like you to expand on, if you would.
Okay.
You referenced the need to have greater clarity and to eliminate duplication, presumably in connection with planning and zoning and building restrictions, and not have them overridden by the region. And then you also commented about the advantages of a centralized planning authority with a Niagara-on-the-Lake presence within it. And I was having trouble understanding at what level this creature would exist and under what circumstances. And I should probably add one other thing, and this isn't scientific, it's just anecdotal. I have been told that Niagara-on-the-Lake can be one of the more challenging places to build, particularly on the residential side, both in terms of cycle time on applications and complexity of rules and things of that kind. Your members presumably have a perspective on that from having tried to expand a business, and particularly I expect with any licensed establishments, not residential. Obviously, I'm talking about commercial. Can you comment on some of those things, please?
Okay, certainly. Thank you for that question. The reason for requesting clarity and just a clean focus on planning and bylaws is exactly what you've pointed out. We tend to have very long delays. There's confusion on applications, that people are not seeing a one-window service on planning and getting development permits issued. Development in Niagara-on-the-Lake, you're correct, is very it's subject to a lot of scrutiny. A lot of different committees are overlooking it. We have urban design, we have a heritage committee, then it goes off to the region for comment, then it comes back, and then we have NPCA. So there are many levels that feature in the review of applications. And those are a good thing, frankly. It's good to have the oversight, as long as all of the rules are clear and that they're evenly applied across the board. That's what our members are looking for. But they're looking for answers. And, you know, going to the lower tier municipality and being told, oh, that's with the region, we have to wait for that to come back. And then it comes back, and everyone may not be aware to the same level. I think that's the issue. Maybe it requires clear guidelines and then training across the board for both. As far as having a presence in a regional style planning committee or planning department, I would say it would be exactly that. It would be, this is the Niagara Planning Department, and within it, here's the Niagara-on-the-Lake area that needs, now it doesn't mean that we would need 12. Maybe there are, we're a heritage town, we're agricultural, those could be the features that are in that area. So anyone that's agricultural, 20 Valley, Jordan, other municipalities, they may be served by the same experts in that area. It's just an idea that we've had.
Interesting idea, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Okay,
are you
thank you.
leaving your submission with our staff?
Yes, I have left it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Our next registered delegation is Tim Parker from the Victoria Centre Business Improvement Area. You're scheduled for 1:35, but if you're here, we will let you on, but you're not here, so.
Is Sue Mingle here? Okay. Give them a few minutes.
Well, if you want to stretch your legs for a couple minutes, we'll be back to you in 5. Well, I guess we're going to reconvene now. Is Sue Mingle here? Sue, I believe you're our last speaker. If you would explain to the audience who you are and who you represent, and we have allocated 10 minutes for you.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. I am Sue Mingle, the Executive Director of the Fallsview Business Improvement Area, or in short, BIA. We represent 85 businesses, including 11 high-rise hotels, the Skylon Tower, and several small to mid-sized accommodations properties. We have 40 restaurants, several major attractions, and close to 5,000 guest rooms. The Fallsview Casino is also within our boundaries. The Fallsview BIA accounts for $604 million in tax assessment. There are 13,000 guest rooms in Niagara Falls. A little bit about us is, or Niagara, we have 4 BIAs that are related to tourism: Fallsview, Lundy's Lane, Victoria Centre, and Clifton Hill BIAs, each representing a unique experience and personality with almost $1 billion in tax assessment. And although I do not specifically represent the Niagara Falls Canada Hotel Association, they have asked to include a message from them, very short. The Niagara Falls Canada Hotel Association is a significant contributor to tourism in Niagara Falls and hopes they will be invited to the table to be a part of the conversation, as this is very important for Niagara Falls' future. Niagara Falls is a unique city and the #1 recognized tourist destination in Canada, creating approximately 40,000 jobs. The name and brand and city of Niagara Falls is recognized all over the world, and this has been due to the great efforts of the tourism industry in our city for many years. The city of Niagara Falls is very responsible in their management. 20 years ago, they reduced council size from 12 to 8 councillors and eliminated the ward system in order to harmonize the city and have better representation and governance to its residents and businesses. As in any municipality or region, there are benefits and challenges in how effective and efficient they are. And as most would attest to, the costs of various municipal and regional services, as well as the efficiency and effectiveness, could always be improved. And as we personally do in our own businesses and homes, these factors should be constantly evaluated. Municipal government is the most hands-on, timely reactive, result-producing level of government, and it affects its residents on a daily basis. It has a direct impact on the quality of life of its constituents. It is the strength of any community. Niagara Falls has a ratio of 1 councillor to 11,000 residents. This balance gives the councillors the ability to address the needs of the residents and businesses and to represent them well. Having councillors be responsible for large numbers of constituents dramatically impacts the effectiveness, the assistance, and the ability to respond in a timely manner. Much like a person that is overworked, when one's workload is too great, other things suffer. Too few municipal councillors and support staff has an impact on the democracy of an area because they are just not able to be accessible to all of us, the people who rely on them to manage our city as well. The Niagara Falls tourism industry for many years has had an exceptional working relationship with our municipality, and this is a significant factor for us in the way of service, decision-making, and our governance. Our city is in tune with our needs. We have found that regional government is another full layer of governance, which is often not in tune with the individual municipality's needs. There have been concerns raised for years about the effectiveness of another layer of government. We understand there is difficulty and cost associated with dismantling regional government. However, there are also great costs associated to amalgamation as well. After much research, we understand that some cost and service savings can be realized by collaboration and amalgamation of some smaller municipalities. However, the Niagara region's communities are too diverse to be run by a single municipal government. It will be impossible to take care of the needs with a single city model. Much like our four tourism BIAs in Niagara Falls, every area, every city has different priorities and personalities. that cannot be maintained by blending all into a melting pot, which is essentially what amalgamation is. There are communities like the Northern Six of Aurora, East Gwillimbury, King Township, Georgina, Newmarket, and Whitechurch Stouffville that have had much success in collaborating to combine and share municipal resources and reduce costs while remaining autonomous and individual. We do not favor a one-city approach. In fact, we feel it will be detrimental to the area. Bigger is not better, and one size does not fit all. Mega-sized is really only good for Slurpees, French fries, and perhaps tissue paper rolls. We do understand that the provincial government feels the need to reduce the number of municipalities and politicians. And in that spirit, we feel each city should have the option of entering into an amalgamation based on what is important to them. We firmly understand that Niagara Falls, due to its significant uniqueness and worldwide brand, should remain its own city. The expertise in Niagara Falls has built a strong tourism industry, and to water that down, no pun intended, by creating a different entity will have a negative impact on tourism and, of course, on our economy. And although we have heard recently that others do propose a one-city approach that will strengthen and provide better tourism, we cannot pretend that other cities in the region are experienced in this as Niagara Falls is. The brands of Niagara-on-the-Lake and Niagara Falls, each in themselves, are significantly different and unique to the world. There is no other place like either of these. Niagara Falls is a significant economic driver for Ontario and Canada, and making us vanilla serves none. One only has to do a little research to know that all over the world, people are traveling to visit the smaller areas that are special, have unique character, where they feel safe and they can be part of an experience. It is prudent to collaborate and work together and make better use of tax dollars to reduce duplication of services. Absolutely. We feel this can be achieved by a 3 or 4 or maybe even a 5-city model, with a council consisting of the mayor and CAO and a small staff for coordination. For example, economic impact is very different for Niagara Falls than other municipalities. However, there's other services that could benefit from a collaborative approach. We respectfully ask that you and the province take the full time needed to evaluate this, as the decisions will have a monumental impact on those who live, work, and visit here. The stress of such a project affects all. Thank you for your time in listening to me and many others across this province. We greatly appreciate it, and I have provided a copy of my comments for your convenience.
Could you tell me what your 5-6 city model looks like and how it would function?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Could you tell me what your 5-6 city model would look like and how it would function?
3, 4, 5. I haven't broken it down into exactly how that should look. I think that in doing that, we have to look at what are the attributes of each city as it sits now, and what are the benefits for who would amalgamate with who. Perhaps there are rural areas that would benefit from joining together. Perhaps there's some that would not benefit from joining together. So that's why the broad number, because I think it really depends on what each municipality as it sits now needs to be able to function optimally. And the other part of the question was?
Well, in that kind of a model, what about all the region-wide services?
Oh, okay, that's right. So the proposal that we discussed was having a council that each municipality would have its own council, but then from that council, the mayor, perhaps the CAO, maybe another councillor, I'm not sure, it would depend on what worked, would sit together on a separate council or a committee that could manage with a small staff the collaborated services that are of benefit to be used by all, if that makes sense.
So which of the regional services then do you think could be done locally?
Well, I think research has to be done into those services to see what makes the most sense. School board could be one of them, for example.
We're not dealing with school boards here.
but they're part of a region, they are part of the whole regional
They're not
area.
in our exercise here.
Okay, okay, we won't talk about those. Perhaps water management, perhaps trash management, police services. I think that you have to look at each service that the municipalities use and what they all use and see how do you collaborate those and make them function in the best possible way.
I have two questions. The first is, when your members are engaged in business expansions or by redeveloping property, things of that kind, what's been your experience in going through the development approval, permit drawing, building permit kind of process with the existing structure? And do you have any recommendations or conclusions about that based on your members' experience?
Okay. I'm not business developer myself, so I can't speak specifically to that, but I know that when we work on projects within our BIA, we have a very good working relationship with our municipality and city staff there and our council, and have for many, many years. So there is a very good partnership that is formed there with help on both sides. Some of that sometimes has to also go to the other level, the region, and my apologies, but that's not always an easy task. And it's 2 levels. It becomes 2 levels now. If whatever is being done infringes on anything that the region governs.
And would that extend to the Parkway Commission as well?
Pardon me? The Parks Commission?
Would that extend to the Niagara Parkway Commission?
The Niagara Parks Commission works in tandem with our tourism industry in a great way. We sit on the same boards, we collaborate together already. We already do that and have for many years.
Okay, my second question is, you made reference to the experience of Niagara Falls City Council going from 12 to 8 and going from ward-based system to a citywide election, and said that there was still leaves their council members accessible to your members and to the public generally. I guess one of the questions I have when people abandon a ward system and go to a citywide system is, in theory, you end up with one councillor representing 8 times more people than they did before that. So I'm just wondering how that transition, if you were around during that period of time, whether you see any experience on that.
Thank you. I was. I know. I was just a small child, but
I wasn't suggesting you were old. I wasn't suggesting you were old enough to vote.
No.
I was just wondering whether you.
I was old enough to vote, and I remember it very distinctly. And it was probably the first time I became really aware of how the municipality affected us as residents, and what was happening in the ward system. And it was significant for us being in the tourism industry because we had a private business at that time. With the ward, you essentially have pods in a city. So this councillor is in charge of that pod. So his focus or her focus is on what's going on just for those people, rather than the entire city as a whole. What was happening in the tourist industry was our tourism industry, the land, the area, was part of a particular ward. No one that owned businesses in that ward lived in that ward. So a person was representing the tourism districts, but yet that person wasn't being voted in by tourism people. So they were being voted in by residents that were not in the tourism industry. So here you have residents living all over here with different councillors, and you have the one that has the greatest reach or ability to touch tourism industry, and they're not voting for him. They have no impact. What we really found was they didn't really care what the tourism industry had to say because they weren't giving them their votes. In taking the ward system away, we now have councillors that are in tune to all of the different needs within the city. One of our councillors, and who's also my chair, is here today, and I can tell you from my experience in working with him for many years, he gets calls from every kind of resident business within the city that he's able to help and assist. So no one is pigeonholed into you are taking care of this. Does that help you to understand?
Actually, it's an excellent expose of that whole issue. And one of the things that strikes me is that's an argument that could be applied on a different plane too, but we won't
Yeah.
get into that here. Thank you.
And it was also approved by the OMB. I'm told.
And of course, that process is one that is continuing. I appreciate your comments, and thank you very much. And you have some material you were going to leave with our staff?
I left it with
great.
Diane, yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Well, this, I believe, brings us to the end of our registered delegations, and so we are going to give you back the rest of your afternoon, and thank you for your participation. Thanks again to the Regional Municipality of Niagara for their hospitality and providing support to this exercise, and I hope we have given you an opportunity to express your views on something that is important not only for the Niagara community, but across much of Southern Ontario.